there, brother, if you would. I'm watching. Hopefully,
What's
let's
up,
just
Tom?
wait.
What's up, buddy?
Yeah, and just to make sure everybody's okay with this kind of being broadcast, who knows where. Not that there really needs to be consent, but you're all good with the praise, Josh.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm good.
Cool. All right, Tom, are we good, buddy? I didn't see. Can you give a thumbs up or anything? Or
Tom Luck.
he said good to go. All right, you guys. This is this is like the UFC ultimate slavery debate. And I'm gonna kind of steal this term from modern day debate, but this is the slavery debate to end all slavery debates right here. So you guys take it away.
Awesome. Well,
Go
yeah,
ahead,
this
Bruce.
is the greatest slavery debate ever in the history of humankind. Just note that in your diaries. But yeah, so I kind of want to focus. I mean, I guess we could start off. You don't mind, Dr. Josh, with Exodus 21, the beginning. We can go through Exodus 21. I think that's probably a big focal point from both sides. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, man. Yeah, roll with it. And if I sound distracted at all, I'm driving on somewhere
Yeah.
going
Oh,
toward
yeah.
Detroit, so forgive me, but I should be able to try.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Make sure you drive safe. That's the most important thing. But so in Exodus 21:2, I guess 2 through 3 with the Hebrew. Now I would say modern scholarship. I think the predominant view in modern scholarship is these were Israelites, that these were ancient Israelites. However, I have some good citations that older scholarship, like in the past scholarship, like we call old school scholarship, they took it not as Israelites. And are you familiar with both sides? And I was just curious about that.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I mean, I think you and I have probably talked about this. Meredith Kline sort of did one of the,
Mm-hmm.
the I don't know, seminal studies. There's three. I mean, I know this is for the audience. There's three papers that came out in the 50s dealing with this connection. And just so everybody knows what we're talking about, the Hebrew word ivri in
Yep.
Exodus 21, it's translated when you read it in English if a Hebrew slave or Hebrew servant or whatever. And when the cuneiform text started coming to light, particular places like Nuzi or in the Amarna period in the second millennium, you started to see a group of people called the Habiru or the Apiru or the Abiru.
Right.
They show up in different ways. And this group, they, there's some functional differences between them through time, but on the whole, they end up kind of being. They end up functioning as like mercenaries or
Right.
brigands, or they're sort of like the quintessential in the biblical text. The quintessential comparison to the Habiru would be David and his band of like brigands that are out in the forest, the Brook of Besor. Like they're the ones that are like kind of consider this. They're out. They're away from. Um, they're disenfranchised. They're
Right.
out away from the main group. Anyway, but they at Newsy in particular, the second half of the second millennium, you see. Well, anyway, sorry, we don't have to go through all
Oh
of
no.
that. The
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Go ahead, man. I've talked. Go ahead.
Well, no. Yeah. I think those are. Yeah. I think those are um, accepted viewpoints on both sides. That yeah, these are like caravaneers or like you said disenfranchised. Some of them could be even like outlaws and stuff like that, like rabble rousers.
That's right. Yeah.
So
And in
and
the
yeah,
just real quick to sorry, like in the Amarna letters, 14th century, like you see Canaanite kings, local Canaanite kings, talking about the Hapiru or the Habiru that are like causing all these problems, right? And they're
Yeah.
you know making things difficult. And the Pharaoh, please, send help, send some assistance, whatever. Um, and so you can hear, and once this term came to light, scholars started to make the connection. You can hear Ivri, which is ayin beit resh, and so guttural br essentially,
Right.
and guttural br in Habiru or Apiru or Abiru. And so there was this spark. Oh, well, maybe the term Ivri is etymologically connected to Habiru. And if that's the case, like, what does that mean?
Right.
And so, this sort of went back and forth. And as you're talking about, like early on, it was it's a good connection. And so then things started to be like read into the passages. And then Meredith Klein put out these 3 articles and sort of engaged with the problem. In the end, concluded, that there might be an etymological connection, but the question is, how does the word Ivri function in
Right.
the Hebrew Bible? And this has sort of been the approach that scholars have taken, as you say, to date. Is there's a difference between where did this word come from, and what does it mean in the context? So yeah. Anyway, that's the background. Go ahead.
Yeah, spot on there. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would say that the modern viewpoint is that it's like an appellation for Israelites. Like it was more of a banner or title or moniker that these people took on. But I would say that I would agree with that. But I mean, I have some good scholarly quotes that what they said. What always with that appellation, there's ethnicity attached to it, though. And in the I'm saying the earliest form of the word avri or habiru, that there was ethnicity attached to it. Now modern scholarship would say now the predominant viewpoint was there was no ethnicity attached to it. But I would agree. I mean, from the Deuteronomy, when Deuteronomy was instituted, I would agree that it was just purely an appellation. So I think there was a progressive like it evolved into, I think maybe JEPD theory, you could probably go there with that it eventually evolved into more of a Israelite understanding. It didn't have any ethnicity attached to it, but in Exodus it's a little bit different. Especially in my book, I kind of detail this, like the connection between the Habiru and the rabble rousers in Exodus. And I have a good scholarly quote on them. So what would you say? Would you say there's a possible connection between the Habiru and the rabble rousers? It was mentioned in Exodus. What do you think about that, Dr. Josh?
Yeah. So again, to sort of just so everybody's sort of on the same page, because I know what we're talking about, obviously, but just so that it's not
Yeah.
everybody falls asleep. Sorry, everybody. So basically, the question on the table, what scholars are wrestling with, is when it says an Eved Ivri,
Right.
Israelis, or these are Edomites, or these are Moabites, or whatever. Instead, it's like these are brigands, these are mercenaries. It's like a particular class of a sort.
Yeah.
Um, and so that has ramifications if that understanding appears in Exodus 21. And I think like Thomas Dozeman, and again, I'm on the road, so I can't look, but like I think
Yeah.
he's got a pretty good quote about this. But I mean, essentially, if that's the case, or it might have been Bill Propp that said it, but it's the same idea. Is if this is a class of people, generally, that not necessarily, but generally, these are foreigners, right? These are people that are not
Right.
like citizens. And this, you specifically see this at Newsy, because what happens, and that's what makes Newsy such a tantalizing, potential parallel, is because at Newsy you have people coming in who are saying to wealthy landowners, look, I will sell myself to you as a slave, and I will serve you and your wife and your family, whatever, until the master's death, and probably his wife's death. Once that happens, I will perform the correct burial rites, and I'll mourn you and all that stuff, and make sure all your affairs are in order. But at that point, by contract that we sign and negotiate and everything, I will inherit. I will be adopted as your son,
Right.
and I will inherit a portion of, or all of, whatever. Just depends on what's negotiated there. And we have these contracts, right? I have several examples of them in the new book. But so that's one possibility, right? That this is talking about a group of people. And the reason that that's problematic for a standard interpretation of the text is that if these are foreigners in Exodus 21:2, if this means a foreign slave, a Habiru slave,
Yeah.
well, then that's like, wait a minute. Now the 7-year release law, at least in Exodus 21, would have applied to foreigners, which sort of throws the whole system into a bit of turmoil as far as
Right.
understanding it is concerned.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm like rambling on here. The
No, man,
other
keep on. This is so fascinating. I love learning what you have to say as well. So go ahead, man. Yeah, don't worry about that.
appreciate it. So then the other possibility is this is a gentilic, and
Right.
basically what that means is like this is when they say Hebrew, they're talking about a particular ethnicity, a particular. So in the same way that you would say Moabite, or Edomite, or Girgashite, or Hittite, or whatever, Hebrew, it falls under this, like it's referring to the ethnicity itself. Um, okay, so there are two questions, right? One is there an etymological connection between Ivri and Habiru? And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know that we have a good answer on that. I think that there are good scholars on both sides of this that would
Yeah.
say we don't have enough information, or yeah, we think there probably is an etymological connection. Um, the other question is, what does it mean in the context? Now, as you pointed out, in Deuteronomy 15, it's very clear, in the parallel, the passage that's parallel to Exodus 21. It says if a Hebrew man or a Hebrew
Right.
woman, and it's juxtaposed there with one of your brethren or your brother. So it's very
Yeah.
specifically an Israelite. But the question is, what did it mean in Exodus 21? And I swear I'll shut up eventually. Sorry, everybody.
No, keep
Uh,
on. Yeah, it's fine.
there's so much background information to this. So you mentioned the documentary hypothesis, right? The JEDP
Right.
theory, and essentially whatever position people hold, generally speaking, on the formation of the Pentateuch, generally speaking, except for somebody like Van Cedars, um, most people would say that Exodus 21, that section of the law called the Covenant Code, predates, is earlier than Deuteronomy 15. And the Deuteronomy 15 is reworking what we see in
Right.
Exodus 21. So it's not necessarily the case that if just because it means Hebrew as in an ethnicity in Deuteronomy 15, that it means an ethnicity in Exodus 21.
Right.
So, okay, I'm so sorry. My thought on this is uh, there are a couple things. One, the text in 7 through 11 seems to intimate pretty clearly that the person that's purchasing the female slave is not allowed to sell her if he becomes displeased with her to a foreign people, right?
Right.
And given that most people would say in the field would say that the laws in Exodus 21 are primarily, at least the slave laws, are primarily dealing with whoever this Evet Ivri is, this slave of Hebrew slave, this type of debt slave. That given the ancient Near Eastern parallels to how debt slavery functioned for citizens, this sort of automatic release after a period of time, the fact that it says specifically that they're not to be sold to a foreign person, even though that's talking about the female slave there. Uh, um, and the fact that the law is paralleled in Deuteronomy 15 as far as the 7-year release is concerned, it seems like I would want to have a substantial reason to think that it means something different in Exodus 21. And I have yet, like, I haven't seen, and this was sort of Meredith Klein's point, is everywhere else that we see in the biblical text, it seems to indicate a gentilic. It seems to be indicating um, like the ethnicity. And you see this in earlier in Exodus 1, where it talks about the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. And it seems like that's, very much focusing on the Israelites, that they'd be, I guess, proto-Israelites or whatever at that point. But yeah, anyway, I'm so sorry. That took absolutely forever.
No
I
need to
promise to speak
apologize,
a
Dr.
lot
Josh.
less.
And I really appreciate you steelmanning me, because when we get in these discussions, it's always, it's like these distortions of the other side, what I'm trying to say, and it's a battle just trying to even get my viewpoint out there. So I appreciate you actually steelmanning that. And yes, you make some very good valid points, and I would just say maybe some counterpoints that I would might see how you would respond to. So one would be um, the Exodus 21:20, where it says that if a master beats a slave or whatever, that they die. So that wouldn't make any. I'm just saying, to me, that's counterintuitive. I don't see a time where, like, an Israelite would beat another Israelite. I don't. I think that would be counterintuitive. It might make more sense if there was a um what's the best way to put this, maybe like a slave from like another nation, like an Egyptian, like a Habiru, that are probably, like, problem, like they can cause problems, in other words, and that could make more sense, I would say, in Exodus 21:20. um and also there was something else I wanted to add to that as well. I hate when my brain just oh, it's like escaping me right now. But so when you look at Exodus 21:20 through 21, where it talks about the master and the Aved there, and it says if the rod, and if he beats them, maybe it's I think some people have different viewpoints. I would take death penalty on that, but it seems to me. Oh yeah, that's right. So Exodus 21:7 says an ear pierce, that the same Aved that came in and could leave out could also get his ear pierced as a token of commitment to the master, for a lifetime obligation, or just for, like, we would just say, like a perpetual, until the master dies, maybe, or the jubilee. And I would think that would be more consistent for a non-Israelite. But then you make a great point. Then you can't sell them to a foreign nation as well. So um maybe these could be, I guess, maybe there's different distinctions of foreigners as well, um like there's two, what was it, there's like three or four different distinctions of them. And so there's they're all escaping me right now, but yeah. So if you want to respond to that, those are some of my points, and I'd just see how you respond to those.
Yeah, sure. And like a couple of things right off the bat, like the Nechar is a foreigner, and probably more
Nicar, yeah.
the Ger, the Togav,
Yeah.
yeah, the Nokri. Um, yeah, so you're absolutely right. There are definitely different types. There's probably a lot of overlap in different contexts between them. I also would agree with you that in Exodus 21:20, that most likely that given ancient Near Eastern parallels, and of course the use of Nakam there, I suspect strongly. I think with most people that study the passage, that probably does mean death, because it's what we would expect,
Right.
given like what the parallels that we see in Laws of Hammurabi. So I am I am not surprised that you see um, scholars concluding that you have an Israelite master beating an Israelite slave. Um, Primarily, well, two reasons. One, what we see in the Proverbs, I think, is pretty clear. Uh, First of all, like more generally speaking, a father that loves his son disciplines him with a rod. Like that's what they did. That's what
Right.
they thought. And also again, Proverbs 29. I know I always say it, but 19 and 21. It seems to indicate pretty strongly that, proverbially speaking, you can't tell slaves to do things. They're not going to respond to just words. But the other thing uh, that leads me down the path of, I guess, being unsurprised at that sort of thing is that you have other laws in the ancient Near Eastern law collections about um, uh, corporal punishment or like physical motivation, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
of debt slaves in particular, and even things that would be like the most minor or whatever, the most I don't know, on the scale of property, as far non-property as you can go on that scale, and still be in that category, a pledge, right? So if somebody has a loan and they either at the time the loan is taken out or at the time that they default on the loan, somebody from their household goes into the creditor's household as a pledge to work off some or all of the debt. There are rules for how they are to be treated, and the text has, I never remember where precisely. It's between 115 and 118 of the laws of Hammurabi, um, but it says if a master or if a man takes paraphrasing here, but takes a pledge, a free person, or takes a debt slave in, and they're going to serve for 3 years. And then one of the laws says if the pledge uh, is dies a natural death, then there is no cause for a claim to be brought. However, if they die from a beating, then a form of lex talionis kicks in, and so
Right.
then the text says if it was the son of the debtor, then the son of the creditor will be killed. And so, like, that doesn't surprise me. These are for citizens, like these are for people in country. And so it's what I would expect, honestly, of a dead slave,
Okay.
um, if that made sense.
No, that does. Yeah. And like I used to take the point that I was against corporal punishment, that I didn't necessarily see it in the past, but I do see it now. I think even Solomon kind of expounds upon that. He says that withholding the rod of a shepherd. And there's other places. I mean, so the rod was for corporal punishment for sure. I think that is a definite thing. We can. I mean, it's a moral issue. Some people disagree with that, but that's a whole nother debate. I would say, on the ethics of corporal punishment. However, I would also say this too, that the rod by several lexicographers, I can give you a couple citations, and a lot of them put as a sign of authority as well, or self defense. It was a weapon for self defense on many occasions too. So I mean,
Yeah,
I
no doubt,
yeah,
no doubt.
okay,
And I think, and it's also obviously, as you pointed out in the past, like used metaphorically, right? Like there's no question about that. And really, even like later Talmudic writers, the rabbis were talking about how this, and I can't pull the references off the top of my head, sorry, but they talk about how like this was the shevet was not understood to be like a, you know like a normally like a lethal weapon, right? It wasn't, which is one of the reasons that if um, a master beats his slave to death immediately, that you would have to have been you'd have to have been doing something with that shevet more
Yeah.
than what would be anticipated, because it wasn't intended to be that type of a lethal weapon. So yeah,
Right.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So I think we're on the same level with that. You know, I guess, you know, you make a great counterpoint too with the nations there. So it's like, I mean, they could, you know, I think they could be local foreigners that converted into Israel. And I think that could work. So like, let's just say like the Toshavs in like Leviticus 25. Would you say that would be consistent with Exodus 21, or would you say that that would not be consistent, and it would be wrongly to correlate those two chapters together? Because, you know, Bernard Levinson, he actually said that they reworked Exodus 21 in Leviticus 25. It's a whole new law code. And so he's kind of interesting. You know about Bernard, right?
Yeah. So it's like the syntax of the lemma, I think is the name of the article.
Right.
It's got lemma in it. I can never remember the full title, but yeah, just again, so everybody kind of knows what we're talking about. So in the same way that the covenant code in Exodus 21, uh, was again, according to the formation of the Pentateuch research, would say that the covenant code came earlier than Deuteronomy 15, and that later Deuteronomic code came later. They would say that the Leviticus 25, which is part of what they call the holiness code,
Yep.
which is like a later P uh, redaction layer. That's all debated, but that would have come even later. And
Right.
what scholars have argued to greater or lesser degrees is that in the same way that Deuteronomy 15 is reworking Exodus 21 by adding things, or stipulating, I think perhaps clearly, if that's what's going on, that women are also supposed to be released as male slaves are, sort of reworking that Exodus 21. There are other options, obviously, but in the same way, Leviticus 25 is developing the earlier two collections. And so, under that view, there wouldn't be both a seventh year of release and a Jubilee. Instead, the Jubilee, the 50th year, would be replacing the seventh year of release. And the reason
Right.
behind that, the logic behind that, um, would be because you weren't allowed to take Israelites as dead slaves any longer, and so there wouldn't be this need for the seventh year release. They would be working; they would be staying with you as a hired worker. As a brief aside, Bruce Wells has a really interesting article on this where he talks about anticritic pledges and how uh, making
You're
the
kind of breaking
situation
up there,
better
Dr.
for the
Josh.
masters. But
Yeah.
oh, I'm so sorry.
You're
How
better
about now?
now. Yeah.
Let me drop. Okay, good. I was going to drop out and come back in. Maybe I needed to do that. But anyway, right. So, uh, in my opinion, I think what's going on in Leviticus 25 is that the writer or writers is saying, hey, um, you're not allowed to keep Israelites as slaves any longer, even dead slaves.
Right.
You're not allowed to do it. Instead, you have to treat them as hired workers, which means you're going to be paying them. And yet you're still going to support them. Now, there's some debate about what that word means in verse 39, but it's not really relevant here. um, uh,
Yeah.
but anyway, I'm sorry. But
Oh no, man. Yeah.
I think what's happening here, and actually, this is something that I listened to the room, I guess it just was, where you were talking about this. And I've wanted to talk to you about this actually for a little while, just because I want to flesh out, I want to be able to steel man what it is that what you're arguing
Yeah.
here. So what I think is going on in Leviticus 25 is that it's changing this up and saying you can't keep Israelites as slaves anymore. Therefore, if you want slaves, be they debt, be they chattel, whatever, they're going to have to come from foreign. And it's going to have to be foreigners. So you can either get them from the goyim, the ones that are in the nations
Mm-hmm.
around you, be that you're going out and purchasing them or taking them to war, whatever, or they're going to come from those tenant tenant farmers that are living in the land. Um, but that's what I think is going on there. But I wanted to ask you, sorry, because so can you walk me through your interpretation of 44 really down to like 55, but certainly 44 to 47? What is it? Because I've heard you use the phrase, just to make sure I have the context right, like mutual. Um,
Right.
Shoot, I can't remember the phrase. It's like mutual partnership of some sort. But can you just walk me through that?
Absolutely, man. I'd love to. So, um, starting in Leviticus 25:44. So we have, I would say, I mean, I think this goes alongside or in line with the escaped slave from the nations that would find sanctuary in Israel. I think that I think they kind of go hand in hand together. But I mean, that's, of course, that's up for up for debate, obviously. But so there's redemption language. So the word kana, I think there's several different places throughout the Pentateuch, but I mean also outside the Pentateuch as well. But where kana has a redemptive flavor to it. I put that in the book kind of as well. That with Ruth and Boaz, that the word kana was used there, and it says that she was redeemed and she was bought kana, and it wasn't. I mean, I think it would be hard pressed to find to say, well, yeah. So Boaz bought Ruth to enslave her. I just don't think so. I don't think that's
Sure.
really,
Yeah, I agree.
a cogent response to that, because like he was his wife and it was a love story. I mean, you read Ruth, to me, it's a love story, Hebrew love story. I mean, that's what I think the general genre they would probably classify it as. But
Yeah, I
I'm not
agree. It's a,
100% on that. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I agree. He's not purchasing her to make her a slave. I agree.
So that I think, and there's other places as well too, like Kana would be like redeeming the land as well. I have a good citation on this too, if you want to. I think it's in the book. I think you may have read. I'm not sure though, but so what I'm getting out of this is they're redeeming, or I think with the way so this is my position anyway. I don't it's up for anyone to attack. That's fine, but I'm thinking they're redeeming foreigners out of slavery, and they would adopt them, because I think these were landless slaves, famine slaves that were so bad there's no way they could have been reconciled in a 7-year contract or 6 or 7 year contract. So I would say it would be a lifelong obligation. And I think you're familiar with the adoption, manumission, or it was. I know it happened in Newsy and stuff like that, where they would go through a legal I think even Raymond Westbrook kind of put in. He has a really good portion of it in his book there, where they would, go through a legal process, and and they would be adopted, and they would be bequeathed the assets from the master when they died or when the Jubilee landed. And I think Abraham's a great example of that. I think with Eleazar, because he bequeathed Eleazar his assets, or at least he was looking for someone to do that. I think Eleazar was the the placeholder of that, at least. And so that's the way I see it. I mean, if you want to poke holes in that, go ahead, because I want to sharpen my viewpoint. So hey, go ahead, Dr. Josh. I and then also that's right, through 46. So 45 and through 46, and it moves from the nation. So I think they would be attached to a household. I think 45 really explicitly speaks of a household. Jay Sklar did a pretty good summary on this as well. And he's a good scholar on our end. I like Jay a lot. You know. So, oops, you got cut out there. What an awesome discussion, though. There we go.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. You started to break up toward the end, and I was like, I don't know if it's me or. It sounds like it was me, but I think I caught what you said.
Yeah, I'll restate it though, just to like refresh. So,
Yeah,
like,
sure.
so from the 44, it goes from the surrounding nations around Israel. They could read. I would say this is redemption language. I think it has a redemptive quality to it. And I think that's the general principle or theme of Leviticus 25 in general. So if they're redeeming foreigners out of slavery, then it moves into once they are bought and kanad, they would be attached to a household, like just like Abraham and his foreign slaves like Eleazar. And I mean, I think it was a pretty good life because I mean, Abraham, I think again is a great exemplar of that he would bequeath. He was looking to bequeath his assets to Eleazar and his foreign slave there. And even Abraham was from, I think he would be considered maybe probably a foreigner as well, because, I think several places it kind of indicates that he was from some area around Israel, surrounding Israel. But I think 45 is speaking directly about household slaves that would be attached to a household. So I generally, with the household slaves, they didn't really have a 7-year contract like everyone else. And I just think it's because they had debt that was irreconcilable. They had like landless slaves, famine slaves. So they would be attached to the master until the master died. I mean, I think Raymond Westbrook has some good stuff on that as well. And it transitions into 46 and 47. So why are they being inherited from Olam? Because they're one generation to the next that they're deciding to be attached to that household, because I think they love the master. And this is why I connect Exodus 21:7 with the foreigners such as the Toshavs, um, or maybe even the Nakars, maybe even the Nakars. And but I'll end it there. Maybe I was talking too much there, but sorry about that.
No, it's perfect. And so you're under just so that I have a good understanding. So your understanding of uh, 47. Who is the Toshav in 47?
I would say that would be a converted foreigner from the nations that is as converted from, they're being redeemed from those nations surrounding Israel, and now they are local, and so that they're still part of the adoption process. So I think it's still, they're in the process of manumission. That would be until their master died. But this is what I also think. I think Exodus 21:7 is alluding to that, is that they would choose to be attached to that household for the rest of their lives because they love their master. And I think those two correlate with each other. And I mean, there's a few scholars I cited that see the same thing. I know it's very controversial. I'm not saying by no means is that like a consensus or anything, but that's how I see it. And you're right. In verse 47, I see it as a mutual, a co indentured service legislation between the Israelites and foreigners like the Toshavs. Yeah.
So yeah, that part. Can you develop that just a little bit for me? So what would that look like?
Yeah.
That
Mhm. So basically, I think there was a treaty, maybe like a sort of, maybe a parity treaty, or it could be maybe even a suzerain vassal treaty too. It could be one of those two treaties. I think Solomon's a good example of that, where they made an agreement where they could trade and swap events around. So the Israelites could share, they could, like have a contract out their slaves to tow shops, wherever they were, the local tow shops or in that area. So I don't think there's anything nefarious going on because, verse 47 does say that they could wax rich. I mean, or at least get wealthy or have some type of substance, with their belongings. So does that make sense? Or maybe I'm kind of misstating that.
No. I think it clarified it. Okay, so a couple of things, and I can definitely hear you trying to uh, like reconcile some of these issues that I think you're suspecting I'll bring up,
Right.
which is great, right? It's I think it's the way we should be doing this. So the the first thing is who was the Toshav? And Yoram Meshar has it's probably a little dated now article on this, but like people have written quite a bit on these different terms for foreigners and the
Right.
Toshav. The word Toshav comes from the word Yashav, which means to like sit or to dwell. And so then
Yep.
a Toshav is just the noun form of it. And it means like somebody that's dwelling, but most basically somebody that's like dwelling in the land. So in the context in which the word appears, and it can be, in like a connection with like a ger or
Right.
even a sahir, but it seems to indicate some type of a tenant foreigner. And this is more for everybody else. Praise, just so they're not bored by me talking about it and not explaining it.
I'm never bored, man. I love learning from you. So keep going.
I appreciate that. So uh, the way that most scholars um, would understand 44 and following, you have two sections.
Hmm.
Um, sorry. So leading up to it, as you and I've talked about in the past, you have uh, different stages into which an Israelite can fall into poverty. Um, in the first case, he has to sell some of his land. Um, in the second, he doesn't have anything, so they're supposed to give him loans and no interest. And then in the third, he still can't make ends meet, and so he has to sell himself. And what the Israelites
Right.
are supposed to do at this juncture is say, hey, we're not going to uh, you're not allowed to keep them as slaves any longer. You have to keep them as a hired worker, treat them better. So then 44 to 46 is sort of a parenthetical thing that's like, well, where are you supposed to get slaves from then? If you can't get them from Israelites, get them from the nations around you. And it uses this term toshav. And what, and sorry, I'm pulling off just so I can think a little better because I'm having a
Yeah,
tough
man,
time
for
believing
sure.
that traffic. So the Toshav here is probably talking about, it's certainly somebody that's dwelling in the land. But given the rest of the context, it's probably talking about, as you pointed out, foreigners are not, under the law allowed to own their own land. And so they have to rent usually sections of it from Israelites. And so this is often translated like a tenant farmer. And so you
Right.
have this Toshav, and he's renting land from an Israelite, which means he's got to make payments on it, be they in grain or silver or whatever. Well, in that situation, there are two ways that could go. Either uh, you do really well, you could have.
You're kind of breaking up there, Dr. Josh.
Oh, Jesus. Sorry, I'm gonna
There
try
we
to
go.
find a place to pull over here. All right, cool. Um, so the Toshav, he's wheeling and dealing. Oh, damn it! I just went in and out. Damn it.
You're good here.
Okay, no, I went in and exit.
Oh, I see.
I just don't tell anybody. um, but so he has this really great, set of years or whatever, and he makes a whole bunch of money, right? And and that is one way that that situation could go, is the tow shop could do really well. The other is what's envisioned, I think, in 44 to 46, which is that they have like crop failure, they're not able to make ends meet, whatever, and they have to sell themselves into slavery. In that circumstance, there are no rules of Jubilee for the foreigner. It's just you're allowed to keep them for life, pass them on as inheritance. They
Right.
become part of that achuzah, which is a word that you and I have talked about so many times.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but so then the other uh, question is, what about the toshav that does really well? Well, that's what's picked up in 47 to 55. So if you had, a tenant farmer who could do really well, I mean, do very poorly and have to sell himself as a slave, tenant farmers could also do really well, and they could become wealthy, as you talked about. As debt slaves. Well, what would happen? The law is asking the question. So what happens? We've looked at if an Israelite gets poor. We've looked at it if he sells land. What happens? We've looked at Israelite if he sells himself to another Israelite. Well, wait a minute. What happens if an Israelite sells himself to a foreigner who's wealthy and living in the land? Well, here's
Right.
the law, and that's what the law is going through. So
Right.
the things that I would say, the obstacles that have to be overcome in order to see this, because I see where you're going, right? I get it. You're saying that because later biblical tradition seems to intimate that there is, particularly in like the latter portions of Isaiah, you have this idea of bringing in foreigners. They're going to come in. They're going to be there, month,
Right.
new moon to new moon, Sabbath to Sabbath. And so maybe what's going on here in 44 to 46 and following in particular is, foreigners are being brought into the land not to oppress them, not to, quote unquote,
Right.
enslave them, but really as a mercy to them in a sense. And because then they're going to be brought in, they're going to be connected to a household. Ultimately, they're going to be connected to Israel as a people, and
Right.
maybe even as we saw at Newsy and other places, maybe this is their way of giving them an inheritance. And so then they would, in order to do that, they would adopt them so
Right.
that upon their death, they could give them that. They could give them that inheritance. So the problem that we face with that interpretation, I mean, outside of the fact that we don't seem to have language, I understand what you're saying about the use of kana, which in Hebrew for everybody listening is like to buy something or to purchase something.
Right.
If you go to the book of Ruth, Boaz goes up to the kinsman redeemer, the near kinsman redeemer, and says, "Hey, listen, there's this plot of land, from who was Elimelech, I think is who it was.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think that's his name. But Naomi's, late husband, and that's Naomi's got this thing. Somebody, the near kinsman redeemer, needs to redeem it. That's you, big boy." And the guy says, "Oh, great, I'll take it." And he goes, "Oh, well, in the day that you purchase this field, you also got to take Ruth." Ooh, well, if I do that, that's going to screw up my own inheritance, right? Because if I take her as a wife, then any children that I have through her will divide my inheritance up, and I'm not really into that. So I'll pass it on to you, the next kinsman redeemer, because you're already willing to do it.
Right.
So I think the reason that kana is used there, it's not, I don't think it's a case where we can soften kana. I think it's a case where it's being used because of what it means. It's in this context of purchasing back, as you say, redeeming back. It's buying there. I mean, he
Right.
literally is buying the land and he's buying her. So what I would say is that in that context, he's doing that transactional thing, but then uh, in the same way as 21 Exodus 21:7-11, where he's buying this, Amah, the slave woman, or slave daughter, whatever, to make her a wife. Uh, I think that's what's happening here. So I think this would be a special case. What I wouldn't want to do lexicographically or
Mhm.
philologically is to read that nuance of kana into other passages without good cause. And
Right.
all I really see happening in 44 to 46, and this is why this is sort of the standard view. Is I think what's happening here is the reason that olam is being used, the reason that passing on as inheritance is being used, because these slaves, uh, from foreign sources, are becoming part of the landed property, and because they become part of that word achuzah, as you well know, is only it's only ever used outside of that verse to talk about land. I mean, obviously, it's used in
Yeah.
Ezekiel 44 to, like, metaphorically talk about God, um, it's a word that's used for landed property. That's why it's so significant here, and I think the reason that it's being used here, is because they're being folded into the inherited property. I will, and I'll shut up. But I
That's
do want to
fine.
say
Yeah.
this, in your book, and I'm so sorry I don't have it in front of me, obviously, because I'm on the road, but um, there is a you make a citation which it kind of caught me off guard, because I've worked in Leviticus 25 for a while for this reason, and you made a reference where you have the footnote in full, or
Yep.
I think you have a full footnote, and it shows a connection in the footnote between, this idea of inheritance, um, and adoption. I think it mentions adoption specifically, and Leviticus 25. And that caught me off guard. I was like, man, why haven't I come across this before? Um, I think it's probably just something that happened in the editing process, but you, you inadvertently, connected two endnotes together. So
Oh no. Okay.
it's not actually like a paragraph. And if you go back, it's Saul Oleon, is his book. And the title escapes me now, but you'll see it. But he doesn't actually connect those two together. It's just that they're right next to each other in the end note, or in the end
Okay.
notes. And so I think it was just an editing thing. Um, but yeah. Anyway, sorry. I don't know if that was
Yeah,
coherent
I'm
or
gonna
not.
have to try to rectify that because there's been so many editing issues with Amazon. Like
It's
when
fun,
they
isn't it?
say that, it's it is so tedious. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And
Oh
like
dear.
it'll say it's okay, everything looks good on the little template thing, but then when you publish it, it's not okay. It's like then look, it makes me look incompetent.
Oh, it's
And
definitely not you. Definitely not you. I can't tell you. See, Megan handles all of that publishing stuff, and I cannot tell you the number of times she's come back downstairs and said, "Oh my God, like I'm gonna pull my hair out because it's kicking it back again. It's outside of the margins, or it's telling me that it's not centered, or blah blah." So I
right.
get it. It's tough.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try to rectify it. I think if I actually appreciate you telling me that because I actually had to take down the ebook or the EPUB version of it because everything was scrunched together when it showed it was okay
Yeah,
before. Like I don't understand this stuff.
it
Like
sucks.
Amazon needs
It
to do
sucks.
better sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough. And I mean, I get it. They're trying to, like, bring everybody's different, word processors and whatever together. But yeah, I hear you. I
Yeah.
hear
And you made some very good points there, and you steel man me really well with the position that I hold to. And you have a good counterpoint. I would say that there's maybe a few counterpoints for me as well. I would say Leviticus 20 or 25:39 through 40 specifically. Now maybe you have a different understanding of it, but the way I understand those two passages, it says that the you shall be as the Toshabs and the secure, like the Toshab are secure. And the way I understand that is that you shall be on the same level, like as far as economically concerned, like a debt slave. Um, I think it, to me anyway, the way I look at it, I'm going to have to find more citations on this, kind of maybe add to my book. I said in my book, it'll be the last editing. Maybe it's not, because I found out so many new things, and one way told me to keep, adding and to it and make it better. I might do that, but the way I understand it is what it's saying, that you shall be as a secure or a tosha, means that they were on the same level. Does that make sense, or am I?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is one of the complicated Shav, also the word ger, is that it can be used in the word. I'm blanking on the term, but when you have two words that are juxtaposed to one another and they form like a single idea, and I'm blanking on what the lexical term is, but at any rate, so you'll have ger v'toshav, or here you have kasachir toshav.
Yep.
So it's like it carries a different meaning. So uh, what I like what I and what scholars that write on the passage are concluding from this is again there are different types of foreigners that are resident in the land, um, and there's a great book on this. Oh, Josh, come on, buddy. The Foreigner in the Law, by it's edited by Achenbach,
Oh,
but there
okay.
are a bunch of really good articles on this. Not one of them is on this in particular, on this passage in particular. That's actually where Bruce Wells' article is, I think, on the
I love Bruce Wells, by the way. He has great stuff.
evangelical too, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I think his work is top notch. But uh, yeah, what I think the passage is going at here, not only from those terms but from the context itself, is that um, the text is explicit that not to make them work as a slave, right? They're not to serve as a slave anymore, but they're to be as this hired worker that like it lives in the land. And the point
Right.
is that you're not like you have to pay them, right? That's the point, is that they live differently. Again, Bruce Wells makes an argument here that this is talking about an anti-cretic pledge, which I find interesting, but I haven't gone into the details of it enough to know what I think. But again, as you've said, and I say, it's very sharp. But I don't think, given the nature of the passage itself, where it's going to great lengths to say you cannot treat them as slaves. You have to, whatever this other word means,
Mhm.
you have to treat them like that, not as a slave. So if 44 to 46 had said, you also have to treat the foreigner as a sahir, I think this would be a different conversation. But the fact that it says that they are able to be treated as a slave, and then it specifies, you know, keep them for life, they become your property, pass them on as
Right.
inheritance to your children, all that stuff. I think that the context itself demands this. These you can treat as slaves; these you cannot. Um, and that's the other thing. Sorry, I'll land with this. Um, I think one of the things that we all struggle with on its face is when we see passages like, if you read like Gerstenberger, for example, he wrestles with this. I've got like a lengthy quote in my book from him where he's like, how can you have Leviticus 19:33 to 34, where it says, treat the foreigner this way, but then have chattel slavery in 44 to 25, 44 to 46. Like, how does this happen? Now, he's
Right.
not suggesting that that's not the case. He's just saying this is stark. Like the contrast here is it stands out, and he wrestles with it. And the point that I'm trying to make is that um, just because someone is a foreigner, be they like a strict foreigner, like a Nokri or an Eker, or a Ger, like a resident alien, or a Toshav, who's like a tenant farmer, whatever it is, it doesn't mean that if you treat them a particular way, that means you treat a slave a particular way who once was a Toshav. And I think that's a fine point of distinction that we have to make sure we like, hold close,
Right.
because in the same way that uh, in Exodus 21, 7 through 11, the Amah, the female slave, is taken as a female slave, but that doesn't mean that she remains a strict slave, right? Her status is elevated in some way,
Right.
be it to full wife or something else. So just because she's an Amah, it doesn't mean that Amah can't shift in some way.
Right.
And so, in the same sense, yeah, I guess it would be like if we were to say, you have poor people in the land, take care of the poor people, take care of the foreigner, take care of the person that isn't from here.
Right.
But then, if that poor person becomes a worker at Walmart, let's say, I'm just trying to think of
Yeah.
a job, then you can hold that person to a higher set of standards, right? It doesn't mean, well, wait a minute, it said you were supposed to, be nice to the poor people and like give them food or something. Well, like that poor person became an employee. Now you're not doing those things for them anymore. You're supposed to. No, their status has shifted. Their status has
Right.
changed, and thereby the rules that apply or whatever. If that makes sense, I have no idea if that made sense, Bryce, but I
No,
tried.
yeah. No, those are very solid points, and like you raised some very good points. And yes, that I mean it is a very popular viewpoint, and I see where you're going with. I see your views. I do. However, I mean, I guess I would like to shift this now more into even just the framework of the Torah itself, or Pentateuch, and how I mean, I'm so let me just run this past you and see how, like, at least you'll see my argument and see where it's going. And I also part of the couple scholars, Christopher Wright, Douglas Stewart. I love those two scholars. I mean, they're two of my favorite. But the way I understand the Pentateuch or the Torah is these law codes are not meant to be exhaustive. And this is why most of these laws are casuistic in form. Anyway, they're not apodictic laws outside the Decalogue. I think pretty much that is a consensus across the board. Like, I think even maybe I
Yeah,
think you would agree as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Okay.
And let me take a second. Is it okay if I take a second to explain for the
Sure.
audience like what we're talking about?
Absolutely.
So, okay, in the ancient Near East, you had like, of course, obviously, we've known about the biblical law collections for thousands of years. But when cuneiform texts began to be excavated in like the 18th century, and certainly much much more so later, 19th and 20th centuries, um, even up to today, like we have 500,000 cuneiform tablets right now. So if anybody wants a good job that will have some staying power, become an Assyriologist, because we have lots of tablets need to be translated. Anyway, you might not make any money, but anyway. Um, but one of the things that was discovered was that from several different periods, going back into the third millennium BCE, we have these lists of what just look for all the world to be laws. And they look very, very similar to what we see in the Hebrew Bible. So in the third millennium, right at the end during the Or-3 period, there was a king named Or-Nama, and Or-Nama put down this list, and they very creatively called it the Laws of Or-Nama. Um, and it's basically, if this, then that, right? If this happens, then that shall happen. Then you have a law collection from Eshnuna. You have a law collection, the laws of Lipit. You have the laws of Hammurabi, very famously on the stela at the Louvre, that 2 meter tall diorite stela. And uh, these collections, again, all carry a very similar structure. And as Praise said, that they're casuistic law. They're in this. They're cases, they're individual cases, right? So they if X happens, then you should do Y, right? This should be the result. Um, and so these go all the way down with varying form into the first millennium with the Neo-Babylonian laws. So the question like immediately was like, well, what are these things? Well, people started calling them like the Code of Hammurabi, right? And the reason that they called it the code was because a code is this set of laws that's meant to be exhaustive, right? And so they thought, well, these were the laws of the land. And so you'll hear people talk about legislation, normative legislation, authoritative law. These are all basically the way they were viewed from the outset was, this is the picture I always talk about or try to paint is a judge sitting there, at the city gate, and the stele of Hammurabi is like somewhere behind him or something. He's got a copy of it, and somebody comes up and says, Frank here stole my sheep. What are you going to do about it? And the judge says, all right, well, and he turns around and he looks at the stele of Hammurabi and he kind of runs his finger down and says, oh, okay, well, here, in Law 47, it says, so here's what we're going to do. And so basically, obviously, it's a little hyperbolic, but basically the idea was that these were the laws that were promulgated, for example, by Hammurabi, and they were enforceable by the governing authority. And so people like early on, like Driver and Miles are a great example of this.
Yep.
They nuanced it a little bit, but they thought maybe this was just the reason. Sorry, anyway, without going into all that detail. Okay. What scholars realized, particularly like in the 60s and 70s, and then it was really like F.R. Krauss talked about it, and then really the one that about probably Praise is Jean Bottero.
Botero, oh yes.
Yeah, and he had this chapter in his book Writing, Reasoning, and the Gods, and he just goes through systematically what he thinks these law collections are. Anyway, the TLDR, which I'm so cool that I can say that, and I can't really say it now because I've been talking for 20 minutes, but is that we don't know that they were the laws of the land, right? As Praise pointed out, they're not very exhaustive, right? There's lots of stuff that they don't cover. And then there's
Right.
lots of stuff that like they cover in minute detail that you're like, why on earth would you go into 9 different versions of this law, but not talk about this real big basic thing? Anyway, so
Exactly. Yep.
there's a debate that's raging now. I mean, raging is probably a little hyperbolic as well, but like there is no consensus on what these things are. After all about this, which is why I feel like I can talk about it because I just wrote it. But basically, if we don't think that they're like the laws of the land, what do we think they were? Well, there's a view that they're like wisdom literature, right? And it's sort of like there's that sort of the person that put this on paper first was Anne Fitzpatrick McKinley, and she compares it to like Indian Dharma law, and it's like it's what's the best way that you should live life according to the gods and what gives their will for what we should do, but it's not like the law of the land, right? And people like Walford not Walford, John Walton have picked up on this.
Yep.
And talked about it. There are other views like their propaganda. There are views that they're a part of the scientific tradition. There are views that they're part of the school tradition, which break out into the scientific tradition. They reflect the way law was. They don't reflect the way law was. Anyway, lots of different views. But the point is that many scholars today would say these are not the laws of the land. In other words, judges weren't, basing decisions on these cases, because we have cuneiform texts, court documents, right? And none of them are referring back to the laws of Hammurabi as if there's some sort of, standard by which they operate. Okay. So that as the background praise, go ahead. Sorry, I hope that wasn't too much background, but it's an important point, because I think
Yeah.
you deal with this a lot, and I think it's good for everybody to kind of have that background to it.
That was an excellent breakdown and rundown. That was absolutely spot on. And I would hold to these as scribal exercises, with basically scribes inside synagogues, didactic. I think IP did a pretty good job too on some of this as well. Um, I think he had Dr. Falk, but me and Dr. Falk don't even align on many things either. But so basically, the reason why we so I'm going to come from more of a um, evangelistic. So I'm going to turn this more into a more of evangelistic type of principle or hermeneutic, is because it represents what we call paradigmatic law. I think Douglas Stewart and Christopher Wright did so much. In my book, I get some good citations on that, and it represents a ultimate or foundational principle, which so you might disagree with it. I'm just saying from my perspective that the principle that these laws are posed to reflect is loving God and your neighbor as yourself. And that is the guiding or underlying principle of the whole Torah. And so the way I understand it is the laws, the 613 laws of the Torah were extrapolated from the Ten Commandments, or they tried to make laws in their own civil laws within these towns and societies they had, the Jews, and they tried to formulate these laws on. So I guess where I'm going for this too is we don't even know if Yahweh even spoke these laws, these other 613 laws outside the Ten Commandments, and we can't even connect those laws to Yahweh directly anyway. So so in other words, I think to say that the Jews endorse slavery or something like that, I think would be missing the point, because most of these laws, as you pointed out, are descriptive, casuistic laws. And I think the way my Christian perspective, so this might be outside the Jewish perspective anyway, or paradigm, is that these laws are reflecting what Jesus said. He says, if you summed up all the laws together in the prophets, that into two laws, Jesus said that to love your neighbor and love God as with your whole heart. And I think that's the way I understand it now, is like this paradigmatic principle. And to enslave someone, to oppress someone, to make people chattel, especially when it says in other places, like God is the owner of the land, he's the one that owns the property. He owns all the people. I think in Psalms, I put in my book, I think it's in Psalms, I forget the exact passage, but would to be missing that principle. And that's it. So I put more of an evangelistic spin on that, but I think it can be supported, and maybe people can disagree with it, but I think at least it does have a foundation. So what would you say about that, Dr. Josh?
Yeah. So a couple of things that I think everybody should bear in mind here is, and this was one place that in that discussion or room, whatever it was that I listened to that you were in, I was a little surprised, and I obviously won't like make you talk about it here, or
Hmm.
suggest that you talk about it here, because I think it's a complicated issue. Um, but this idea, and this is something that comes up with a little bit of frequency now, which is why I thought I should write a chapter on it. And that is, as you were just saying, that if these laws in ancient Near Eastern law collections were not authoritative legislation, they weren't normative, they weren't the law of the land, enforceable, then um, what were they? Right? They were written by scribes, or they were written by scribes of the king for propaganda
Right.
purposes, or they were written by school for educational purposes, or whatever. Whatever they weren't handed down by the gods. Is sort of the conclusion that one can draw, and I would agree with that, right? The issue here, I think, and one of the ways that gets applied to the biblical text is that, well, wait, if these other ancient Near Eastern law collections are scribal exercises, and we think that this also applies to the laws in the Hebrew Bible, well, then they're not actually from Yahweh, right?
Right.
And if that's the case, then, well, when, like an atheist or some skeptic or something says, well, look, the laws in the Old Testament endorse slavery, then the response can be, well, I mean, like, they're not even from Yahweh, right? Because these are scribal exercises. So, um, I think the issue that you face, if I presented that correctly, um, I think the issue that one faces with that position is that it's sort of a foot in both camps. Like, I
Mhm.
agree, right? I agree that and I agree that these were not handed down, or I do not think that they were handed down on Mount Sinai from Yahweh, right? I think that these are later productions and they're reworked and edited and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, so if that's the case, then that view that I would have would obviously fly in the face of something like biblical inerrancy, right? At least it's traditionally understood biblical inerrancy,
Right.
because now you have texts that are, in the Bible, thus says Yahweh or whatever, that you know we're saying didn't come from Yahweh. So that's obviously going to be an issue. And again, I don't want you to, like, because it's a very complicated issue. I don't want you to,
Right.
like, go on
Right.
record, because I think it's something that it's like something that I would want to think through a ton, and, like, really, because it's very, very complicated. But that would be like the big thing for me, and that's what I say in the chapter at the end, is that, if somebody like, and I haven't seen Inspiring Philosophy's video, and obviously Mike and I are good friends, but it's terrible. I didn't watch his video, but I'm hoping there are lots of my videos he hasn't watched, so then I'll maybe feel better. Um, but if the argument is that they're not from Yahweh, I mean, that's, on the one hand, hey, great, like, I agree. But I do think, to sort of speak to your broader point, um, about, like, the purpose of the law collections, and maybe that's not the way that I would necessarily say it. What I would say is that there's an overarching flavor to them. And this is where, people like Jacob Finkelstein, originally sort of came up with this idea, that they were propagandistic texts, is because if you read through the ancient Near Eastern law collections, at least three of them, um, the laws of Ornama, laws of Lipit Ishtar, and laws of Hammurabi, most famously, they all have prologues and epilogues. And if you read through them, and I talk about this in that chapter, if you read through them, they have this overarching theme, and the overarching theme is that the king, so let's say Hammurabi, for example,
Right.
Hammurabi is chosen by the gods On and Enlil, right? And he's commissioned by Shamash, and he is the good, just, pious shepherd of his people, right? He looks out for the weak and the oppressed, right? He builds up the poor, and he doesn't let the person that's, he doesn't let this vulnerable person be taken advantage of, and he makes safety and security in the land. In other words, ancient Near Eastern kingship was all about, in this sort of essential form, protecting the people, right? Being a good steward, a steward for the God of the God's people, um, like, to the point that in the first millennium, the Assyrian king, who had made the Babylonians to the south his vassal, um, would go down in the New Year's festival to the high priest of Marduk, who was seen to be like the king over all of those, at least over all of Babylonia, but certainly had a significant effect in Assyria. And he would like take off his royal vestments, and the the priest would slap him in the face, right? And he would say, I have done no wrong to Marduk's people, right? I have not mistreated Babylonia." And the point is that a good king would do good.
Right.
And so, like, yes, I absolutely think, of course, you and I both know sitting here, Hammurabi's not putting that in because he's really such an awesome guy, right? He's putting that in
Yeah.
because he's this is what you do, right? You want the
Right.
gods. That message was for the gods. He wants to convince the gods that he's good. Anyway, the point is, it's a type of propaganda. And so, yes, I do think that uh, the laws in the Hebrew Bible are part of this, overarching structure, which has God, right, as the head of this theocracy, being a good, kind, loving, in from their perspective, um, uh, God ruler, and those that are to engage with, people that are foreigners, or people that are oppressed, or people that are vulnerable, like they're to be taken care of. I think this is sort of part and parcel with what you see in the wider ancient Near East. So I do agree that flavor is certainly there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That's so neat learning about this stuff. Like, I'm like a kid in a candy shop learning this. I love the ancient Near East, and I mean, I love watching your channel too, Dr. Josh, with you and your wife and your shows you put out there. It's so cool learning about the our past. And I would just say this too, because I mean, I come from an evangelical perspective on this, and like Paul made it clear that the law, this purpose of the law was only ever to be like a moral guide personally, like it has a didactic force to it. I don't think it ever had like a legalistic force. In fact, the Bible's against legalism. We're always saved by grace and faith, and we're justified by that. We were never justified by the law. So the reason I'm bringing that up, because I even think in the Old Testament, I think the Jews, I mean, Abraham was justified by faith, and not the law. I think the law was just to be sort of like a paradigmatic example of how, that it's summed up, that all the laws are summed up again like the two laws. And I would say, to love your neighbor and love God as yourself. I think that's the fundamental principle of the force of the Torah, and also the Pentateuch, or how you want to say it. But as far as inspiration too, that's a good point. And I think, what I hold to is something called plenary inspiration. I do believe that the Holy Spirit, spoke through, men as or he spoke through holy men, and they jotted it down. It wasn't like God was speaking from the sky and this hand was coming down, and like he's bringing down a tablet with this huge hand from the sky to, little old Moses. And I think that's just fiction to me. That's way out there. Maybe some evangelicals hold to that perspective, but I think most evangelicals hold to plenary inspiration. Um, and I don't think that would affect the viewpoint. So whenever like you were right, a good point there when he said that Yahweh would say that, "Thus saith the Lord." And like, I think One Way had some good stuff on this too. That didn't necessarily mean that Yahweh was like directly speaking. Like this, I forget they call it, like the direct notation or something like that. So they might attribute it to Yahweh, but that doesn't mean like they were expecting like Yahweh directly spoke it. So that's a different, route to go. So what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, some of the hurdles, and I'm gonna probably have to park at a gas station, so I'm gonna have to run in here and use the loo here before I get back on the road. I'll probably have another 45 minutes after that. Sorry, probably everybody in the room didn't need to know that. But keep forgetting there are other people here. Yeah, I think part of the issue one of the hurdles that you'll have to for that position to overcome would be sort of scattered even throughout places like Exodus and the Covenant Code. You'll have things like uh, the law seems to be having Yahweh speak in the first person, like I will
Right.
do this or I will do that, and I think again, like once we leave like a historical critical or something view and we get into like theological issues, like I'm probably gonna respectfully bow out because it's not my
Yeah.
field. But yeah, I think those are things that I think would need to be things that would need to be grappled with, that sort
Right.
of stuff.
Yeah, I can see
um
your point too. Yeah, I can see how the force of the law, like traditionally, might be understood. Oh, these are just, laws that are directly handed by God. They're unconditional laws. There's no way, but that's, I think that runs contrary to what we naturally, our inclination.
yeah, yeah. I'm going to drop out for just a couple minutes, and then I'll be back, and I'll get back on the road. And
Yeah,
we
man.
can again. I got about 45 more minutes after that. So because then I'll have to cross the border into Ontario, and I want to make sure I have my focus when I give them my passport. So
Absolutely, man. And thank you
I'll
for
be
your
right back.
time, by the way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Give me 5. I'll be back.
Sure, man. Is
All
Andrew in the
right.
house still? There he is.
This is the. I'm here, brother. How? I'm just taking a pulse. How you feeling, buddy? Give me an update. How's it going?
It's been exhilarating. I really enjoyed Dr. Josh. He's a very top notch academic. I think I would consider him as a source, like absolute expertise in this, and he makes some very good points. So I appreciate that.
Heck yeah, man. And I think the dialogue's been good. I appreciate the fact that you guys have kept it cool. I mean, it's kind of hard to get in a fight with Josh.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you maintained it cool, and I think it's been a good exchange. So yeah, we'll just give him a little bit here to get back. Now, I guess one thing I was going to ask you guys, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow, is Josh? How much of this does he think is actually history? Like when he talks about how these people are being treated, and giving the logic and the reasoning behind why certain things were instituted, and it sounds like it's almost as though he's saying that this is historical, like these things occurred, because it's not just like it's not like isolated, broken up parts of the scripture that he's making sense of. Like he's connecting it with other
right.
scriptures and other thoughts, and it's almost like it is an actual, like he's positing it as something that is cohesive, and it's something that took place. That's how I understand it. But I'll have to ask him when he comes back. But how do you understand that?
I,
Praise, like what he's saying. Does he affirm any of this stuff?
I think he accepts it just for for the circumstance of us talking. I don't think for his personal view, I don't think he necessarily accepts that. I think he was just doing that out of respect for me, talking with me, that he accepts it just for the for the principle, or for talking about it. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, I guess to me, it's like when he starts getting into like the psychology or the reasoning behind certain
Right.
laws or certain ways of doing things in the Old Testament. It makes me wonder how he would be coming to that conclusion. If these events didn't occur, there's no real mind that I mean, like, yeah,
Yeah.
people authored these things for sure, but it's not like, if these things didn't occur, it's kind of strange. It seems to me a little strange to say, well, here's the reasoning as to why they did, X, whatever it is.
Right. That's a great
Because
point. Yeah.
yeah, so I do want to ask him about that, but we'll see when he comes back. And then I guess after you guys are done with the exchange, you can just open it up if you and Josh are up for it, or maybe if he only has 45 minutes left, maybe you guys could, wrap it up in the next 20 or something like that. I don't
Yeah.
know. We can just kind of play
Yeah.
it by ear. But if you guys do, then we could open it up and let people come up and kind of, ask questions while you both are still here. If you're up for that, Praise.
Absolutely, man. I'm enjoying this, so for sure.
Right on, buddy. Yeah, and the replay's on, so you'll have access to it. And I think Tom's doing something with it. I don't know if James is tired is. I don't know if you are, but anyway, there should be plenty of access to the audio.
Yeah, I'll probably try to maybe play my channel, review or replay it on my channel and see what people think. And I love Dr. Josh. Meet him. Like we've had like I would say a friendly mutual relationship personally, and we've had fierce battles, and I mean, as far as like doctrine goes, that's where we left it. And I think that's where people should leave it. Don't ever go personal with these type of topics and controversies. There's no need. There's no reason to. So that's what I would say.
And you're even saying that to yourself, right, Praise?
Absolutely. It's a
Good.
double reminder for me. Yes.
Good, very good. Well, so I did want to see Jacob or Secular Selah. Good to see you. Do any of you guys have any thoughts that you wanted to? I don't know anything on the discussion. If you guys are there, welcome back, Josh. But anything you guys wanted to say before we kick back to them? I don't know if anybody's even there. Selah, Jacob, Secular. All right. Well, if they don't come to the mic, that's all good. So go ahead, Josh. Glad you're back, buddy. I did want to ask you though, Josh. I was just telling Praise like I didn't want to interrupt you guys while you're having the dialogue because the flow of it was good. But um, how is it like? I don't understand like when you get into like the reasoning of as to why the Israelites maybe had certain codes or certain laws or did things a certain way, if in fact you don't think that these accounts are historical. It seems kind of strange to kind of like almost like get into the psychology of the people involved when in fact it's just a writing about something that didn't even occur. That seems strange to me. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm just kind of wondering how that makes sense to you because it's kind of confusing to me.
Um, sorry, I'm just trying to get back on 75. So, it is the question, like, why is it? Sorry, is it that do I think that these laws? You know what? Maybe ask me. I'm so sorry.
Okay, yeah.
I was
No,
trying to make
you're
a
all good.
turn.
You're all good. Let me
Ask
restate
me.
it. It's all good, and it might have been sloppy too. So let's try this. How about it's a two-parter. Do you think that these narratives have any grounding in reality? Like these events occurred, even loosely? Um, I mean, or how loose do you think they are, if loosely? And
You
then,
talking about?
and then
Okay.
like just the slavery, all of it. I mean, obviously, I don't think you think this occurred, but if there was a group of Israelites that were like that had these codes wherever they got them from or however they got them, I guess, because presumably it's not from God, obviously, right, from your worldview. So, like, how do you understand that? What actually occurred? Because it sounds like you're on top of that. It sounds like you're saying that there's a certain psychology that these individuals have as far as why they're putting things together the way they are or the way they do, the rationale behind certain laws. I'm just trying to understand how that coheres together.
Okay. So can you hear me? Okay, because you cut out for
Yes,
just a half second, so I'm worried that it's
yes.
obviously
No,
me.
no, it's probably
Um.
me, brother. It's probably,
So yeah. Okay. So the unfortunately for the study of um, the biblical laws or the biblical legal tradition, we're limited in the source material that we have, right? So when you look at something like ancient Mesopotamia, we have a plethora. Um, we've got, again, 500,000 cuneiform documents, and many of those are administrative texts or legal texts or contracts or court documents, whatever. When it comes to the, ancient Israel, ugh, there's not a lot to have extant. So you have some Aramaic papyri from like the 5th century. down in Egypt and Elephantine. You have like some of the documentation that we have from the New Babylonian Empire, where the Jews were there in exile. Like there's some stuff we can draw from that. But the reality is that when we try to recreate to the best of our ability what we think the law looked like, and how it functioned in ancient Israel, where we ultimately end up coming back to the Hebrew Bible. And one does not need necessarily. My screen just shut off. That's frightening. Sorry.
Your car navigation or your phone?
The car navigation, which is
Oh, take your
bad.
time, Josh. Take your time,
Given
buddy.
where I am. Sorry. Okay.
No, you're good, buddy.
So, with that being said, I'm so sorry, guys. I feel so scattered. Place I keep it once. What we do to try to reconstruct ancient Near Eastern law is to try to use the Hebrew Bible in a meaningful way.
I have a question.
So, one of the ways that we come at the law collections in Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus is scholars look at ancient Near Eastern parallels. Sorry, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. God.
It's a little faded, just a little bit.
It did dampen a little bit just before you asked that, so you probably know you did something.
I
But
think it switched over to my truck.
it's not unbearable, but it is definitely quieter. Take your time, Josh.
Give me just
It's
a
all good,
second.
buddy.
I'm
You're
trying
good,
to
buddy. You're good.
reconnect.
You're good. Yeah. Meantime, yeah, I'll just let you do that for a second, Josh. Tom,
Yeah, you're a little quiet
got
though.
something you wanna? I am.
No, Dr. Josh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I'm back.
There we go.
Yeah. That was just my AirPods or whatever. So one need not assume the historical reliability of the
Yeah,
narrative
we
in
love you,
which
man. I mean, yeah, I do have something I want to say.
yeah, go
Of course you do.
go ahead. Sorry, I've been droning on.
It might be Tom was hot micing there or something. I don't
Who,
know.
me? Oh, you're asking me? I'm sorry, I just switched over. You wanted me to ask my question? Is that I didn't hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so here's my question. And like I'm asking this because it seems like kind of like hearing just a lot of conversation about like what you guys agree on, and then like oh yeah, patting each other on the back and like you're right about this, but like I mean I think there's a lot that you guys do not agree on. For example, I was watching one of the panelist videos with Kip, I think, and your wife, and Praise's quotation marks book came up, and I'm trying to recollect, and I think you'll probably know what I'm talking about, Josh. You were talking about something that was like a symbol, or is like a something kind of like an accent mark on at the end, and then praise, according to you, Josh, and the other people, had the meaning completely wrong, and it actually just meant ish, I believe is what it was. You remember what I'm talking about, Josh?
Yes, I know.
Yeah, so have the question is, have you set Praise I Am straight? Has Praise I Am received the correction on that yet?
I received the rod of correction on that.
I don't think from me have you talked to Kip?
No. I respect Kit. Me and him haven't had too. I guess we're not on good terms. That's fine. I mean, I don't. But yes, I. So what I did is I overemphasized the wrong thing. The diacritic. The diacritic has nothing to do with what Dr. Stewart was actually talking about. So I emailed Dr. Stewart. So it's more ignorance on my end, which I mean, I'll gladly admit that I was more ignorance there. But I wasn't fully wrong either. But I mean, they're kind of connected. I'll explain. So the root etymology of the word steal or meant, to steal or kidnap in Exodus 21:16 has the root GNB, ganab. And what Dr. Stu and other scholars have said about this, the root etymology or the root of the word connects to the apodictic law and the Ten Commandments, which would have a universal force to it. So in other words, it would not just be Israelites. You cannot kidnap not only Israelites but anyone, because it's a universal law, because it reflects the apodictic force of the law. So it wasn't just about so I was wrong that it was specifically about the diacritic, the little accent mark. That has nothing to do with anything. So you're right, Dr. Josh and Kip, on that. So I'll gladly admit that.
And just so I was trying to come off on mute. So just so that everybody kind of knows what we're talking about here, what the issue is. In Exodus 21:16, text says essentially if a man steals another man and sells him into slavery, or he's caught in his hand, which the syntax is a little goofy there, but or at least ambiguous, then they're put to death, right? And the question is, does this refer to stealing anyone, or does it refer to stealing a fellow Israelite? And there's two reasons that this comes up as an issue. The primary one is in Deuteronomy 24:7, which is sort of a parallel law. It's explicit that it's talking about Israelites. It doesn't mean that it was legal to steal anybody necessarily, but it just meant that there it was saying specifically fellow Israelites. So the other reason that this becomes an issue is that the way the Septuagint translates this is it seems, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think it says among the children of Israel.
Sons of Israel,
yeah. And so what it sounds like Doug Stewart is saying is that, and then this is something that like people have you're right, people have talked about. It's funny. Just come on over into my lane and then get mad at me when you almost run me off the road. Anyway,
I heard him honk at you.
I heard you. I heard you also give him the correction, like you gave to Praise I Am.
Yes, quite. So what was I saying? So one of the things that we or that Pentateuchal specialists seem to talk about when it comes to the covenant code is that Exodus 20, which contains one of the renditions of the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, it seems like, generally speaking, there's a lot of parallel between the way that Exodus 20 is structured and the way that Exodus 21 itself is structured. There seem to be some parallel runnings, and so by saying that don't steal in the Decalogue is meant to be more universal in nature, that if that's paralleled in 21:16, that should also be universal in nature. Me personally, it's not a big deal to me either way. Like you have laws throughout the ancient Near East that it's illegal to steal people, so it doesn't surprise me whether it be universal or not. What they would have considered stealing obviously is different, from what maybe we would consider stealing. But at any rate, yeah, the thing that I think, and praise, it sounds like you just said it. Oh shit! It says bridge to Canada.
Right. I mean,
I don't
look,
want
the
that one.
point is that Praise saw
Sorry.
some kind of notation, which is just shorthand, and he came to some conclusion that said that where he was saying, "See this, guys? This means that the man stealing is bad," and it was nothing of the sort.
Yeah, and I think that the nice thing about praise is I think praise owns. I've heard him do this a lot, and
Yeah.
just now, right? Like owns it when he messes up something,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
He
think
did
that's
receive the
good.
correction. You know, he didn't flinch or anything. He just, you know, he just took it.
Yeah. Yeah. I
mean,
admit
I
my
expect
ignorance on that one.
I mean, in this case, Joshua Bowen gave Praise the correction, and maybe the next time it'll be the other way around. I mean, when I heard Andrew pitch this room to me about two biblical slavery experts going head to head and fighting with their biblical slavery knowledge, I thought of like, Dragon Ball Z, where Gohan and Cell both Kamehameha simultaneously, and the beams meet in the middle, and it sort of like starts to go to one side or the other, but it always kind of hovers around the middle because they're both biblical slavery experts, right?
And I didn't let you down, Tom. Right? Right.
What's a Dragon
yeah.
Ball Z?
Yeah, whatever, dude. They get it.
Anime. I love anime.
But yeah, I mean, you two are really the only biblical slavery experts that I know of. Around this community. Who else is there?
Adams,
no,
right?
I don't think. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Just these two, right?
Matt Adams.
Oh no! I said biblical slavery expert.
Oh, okay. Oh. Okay.
Ouch.
Oh, wait, no, Matt Adams. Actually, what about Dr. Kip? He comes on here every once in a while. Actually, I don't know.
He's like a peripheral participant.
He's a side.
Yeah. See, I didn't say. See, I said biblical slavery expert, not biblical slavery kiddie pool. Now there's sometimes mistaken, but
clip that phrase. Send it to Kip. Send it to Dr.
No. I wasn't talking about Kip. I was talking about Matt Adams.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Ouch.
Yeah, I didn't say that, Matt. You are welcome to defend your honor. And yeah, just put your hand up. Come on up. We'll have you up here to kind of deal with Tom. Take him to the woodshed.
But is there anything on the table right now that you disagree with, guys? I mean, that you want to talk about? Like something specific, like something that I mentioned?
Maybe the creditor. I think in Kings 4, I think Dr. Josh's voice that the creditor that when the children are taken. I think he thinks. If I'm not mistaken, am I mistaken that Dr. Josh? You think that was kind of cruel, right? Or is that the way you look at it?
I mean, not from their perspective, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a perfectly legal thing to do. I mean, she certainly didn't want it to happen, and it was like the whole point of Elisha doing the miracle. But I mean, as far as the law was concerned, it was exactly what was called for.
Yeah.
I have a question for Praise I Am.
Go ahead, man.
So, I've talked to Matt Adams, and he said that he didn't want to read any of Paul Copan's books, and that he doesn't use the Paul Copan method. Have you read any of Paul Copan's books? And if so, what are your thoughts on him? Or if you haven't, what are your thoughts?
I have. I read most of his new book. Has got a vindictive bully and has got a moral monster. I think he has some good points. Like maybe they're not on the cutting edge of scholarship, but I do think he has good supporting biblical arguments, and that's where I'll say with him, maybe his scholarship needs some more touching up. I think Dr. Josh might not align with him on many things, but I do align with him on many things as far as like his hermeneutical arguments go. I'll just put it that way.
And one just slight follow-up question. He's supposed to be on my channel. Sometime we're just still hammering out a date. When I get him on, do you want to join and have the conversation with me?
Oh wow.
I would love to. Yeah, I had him on my channel already, so I think he might remember me. I love Paul Copan. He's a great source. Yeah.
Alrighty, that's all. Sorry to the chat who thought I was
If we
come in
want to
late.
like continue on just a little bit more with the Dragon Ball Z analogy, if you were using your scouter and looking at Paul Copan, what would the scouter tell you about his biblical slavery power level? Praise.
Oh, you're you're gonna have to refresh me. Like, what is the system of or the
Come on,
grade on
praise. You don't know what a Dragon Ball Z?
that?
Well, traditionally over
I don't know the
9,000
grading
is like off
system.
the charts good, right? So
I was gonna say
Okay.
a 7, but that's good.
7, not
Yeah, I
7,000,
would
but
put him
just
around 8.
7, not 7,000, just or 700. You mean just the 7?
I mean, like 7. Is that good? I don't know.
7. So okay,
I'm
7.
guessing. I'm guessing from the only 7. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. I'm just gonna be quiet. I don't know the Dragon Ball Z.
I would maybe 7 or maybe 8,000 to 8,500 out of 9.
Well, actually, I started downloading some Paul Copan garbage on YouTube, and I talked to Josh about this already. I wanted to take like some of his lectures, and because a lot of them are like textbook objections by the Christian, and I think we were gonna try and do like a stream about it or something. If I can have everything nice and orderly and to present to Josh and let him give his response.
That'd be cool, man. I'd like to listen to that.
Yeah.
It'll be like a Dragon Ball. No doubt. Did I do it right? Probably not. Sorry.
Yeah, it's close enough. But
There you go. All right.
Phrase,
Yeah.
I am. Do you agree that people were born into chattel slavery?
Well, I'd agree that they are born to a household. But I don't consider that chattel slavery though.
Huh. What do you consider it? Just like adoption?
Yeah. Yeah, I like Abraham and Eleazar. I think that's a great example. Abraham was looking to bequeath his assets, his goods to Eleazar, and I think he took care of his slaves. I think that they weren't. I mean, this way. I mean, that might be an assumption on my end, but I don't see any biblical evidence that slaves, were treated like property. Even though you can take it that way in Leviticus 25, but I don't. I mean, it's very controversial. I'll just put it that way.
You don't see any evidence that slaves were treated as property?
Yeah, I don't see any evidence of mistreatment. I don't, especially in Exodus 22, 21, and other places, Deuteronomy 10, where it says, "Do not oppress your foreigner." But I know it doesn't say goyim there, but it does. I mean, it does say like ger, toshav, or whatever. And I would consider those just converted foreigners from the nations. I don't see any. I don't see any discrimination by the Israelites. It was an immigration place of immigration. Like you had runaway slaves from the nation would come find asylum and sanctuary. So I think it's a good place to go.
I know, John. The praise I am Kamehameha is sort of creeping towards your side. You better be careful.
Where's John Lee? Bring him in here.
Oh, John Lee wants me to be his trigger man in the chat. No thanks, John. Fuck off.
Man, I really enjoyed it was very captivating tonight, Josh, with your points, and I appreciate you expounding and elaborating on all these things about the ancient Near East. I think that is so intriguing to me, and I hope other people find it as well, intriguing.
It's always it's always great to listen to two biblical slavery experts go head to head.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Praise. I feel like we failed everyone though on the whole WWF thing.
Art, I've been throwing you out.
Speaking of WWF, we lost Terry Funk as well, and then I just got the news that Bray Wyatt, the Fiend, passed away today at the age of 36.
Oh my!
Praise and Andrew, did you see the new video that DGH made? The Rage Against the Machine music video.
No.
Oh my god! I'll
I
put
wrote
it in
it
chat.
down.
Put
I
it in
wrote it
chat.
down. Yeah, I wrote it down. I saw that. I was like, I probably need to watch that.
It's incredible. It's really amazing.
Are you talking about Rage Against that group called Rage Against the Machine?
That's right. It's a parody
Oh,
song.
I love that group, man. I grew up on that group. I love that. They have some good music.
Yeah, well, it's animated by DGH, and it has Darth Dawkins as the star.
Darth, bring him in here. Let's talk. Come on, Darth. I know he's lurking around somewhere.
Darth's power level on biblical slavery is very, very low. It's like 7 also.
Is it 7?
His defense just amounts to like slavery in the Bible was indentured servitude, and that's it.
Well, it was the ultimate. You must know the ultimate foundation of all things, Tom. That's part of the whatever he calls it. I forget his arguments now. I don't even care.
Yeah, nobody cares anymore. Okay, well, are we done here, boys? We solved the problem or what?
Well,
Yeah.
let's see. I think we can wrap it up. If is there anybody in the audience? John Lee wants to say something. Anybody else want to put your hand
we
up?
could probably not. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to ask Praise a question.
He will never.
Sure.
How do you explain Exodus 21:21 when it talks about the slave being property?
That's a great. I would as something I did want to bring it to Dr. Josh maybe another time, but yeah, I look at it as a rhetorical device that looks back on another law in Leviticus. I think it's Leviticus 19. I'm not 100% sure that you need 2 or 3 witnesses. So basically, it's a rhetorical device that correlates with that, or it's hinting towards that. It means that it doesn't matter if it's 2 or 3 days, 100 days, whatever. How many days it's required to get enough witnesses for due process. And I give a good citation in my book with that. Maybe Dr. Josh, I would like to see what he thinks about that really quick, actually.
I think he was just a steel man. Can I steel man a question? I don't know. I think what he's asking is when it says because he gets his money, his kesef.
Oh,
Sometimes that's translated property, sometimes translated money, sometimes it's translated silver. And he's asking what your thought is on translating that as property. What would that mean?
oh, I see. Okay, you weren't talking about the 2 or 3 days, right? You're
No,
talking
I'm not
about
talking about that. No, Dr.
Oh,
Josh had it
okay.
right.
Okay, yeah. So I have a citation in my book. It's just a financial unit. I think as much Westbrook actually wrote about it. There's nothing nefarious about that. It's just a financial unit of like an economical unit. How they how they use it back then. So it's just, I think it's just like a currency or something. I'll have to. In fact, let me find it really quick. I'll read it in my book.
Let's say you had a deed to some real estate. Isn't that sort of like an economical unit? Like some sort of financial thing in the same way, or no?
Well, yeah, I think in with the Goring ox, I think that yes, I do think that would be applicable to that. Um,
I just
let
wanted
me
to let
find
everybody
it.
know I just passed 8 Mile. That feels pretty cool.
A
He
mile.
sings. I hope he sings "Lose Yourself."
I was just thinking it. Sorry.
Go ahead, praise if you wanted to. Did you want to do a little?
Yeah.
Go ahead, brother.
Let's see here.
Yeah, don't let me sidetrack you with my nonsense, Brave.
I mean, it
Let's
seems
see.
to
Wow.
me that the slaves were considered property. That's why I'm asking praise. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just really would like to know your perspective on that.
What he
Yeah.
means, Praise, is he would really like it to be property if you could make that happen for him. Sorry,
So,
John.
so the word is kisef, the master's kisef, and here's what W.H. Paul Thompson writes about that. So the word silver or kisef is an explanatory cause of Exodus 21:21 does not necessitate chattel status. It's simply the ancient unit of exchange. And he says, this is from the slave or Flesher Contra. You can look this up. Gregory Shergano. So Gregory Shergano kind of wrote a little piece of that in his debt slavery book. So it's just an ancient unit of exchange. It doesn't denote any chattel. So that's how I would understand it.
Um, would you consider like money that you have as property?
No, I mean, I don't look at property and financial value the same. I don't. Maybe some people do, but I don't.
Because
I look at
I
yeah. So
understand
good.
property as like some sort of possession, you know?
Yeah, well, see, when you talk about chattel, like over time, the word chattel, as far as humans are concerned, is they have no personal identity. Their personal identity is stripped away, and I would say that's not necessarily true economically. If we're talking, this is the way I understand it too. That more of this has to do with debt. This they're not like appraising their personal value. They're appraising their economic value. I think there's a distinction there, if that makes sense.
So would you agree that like property is some sort of like ownership, possession, maybe?
Contractually, yes. Business, what like a business transaction, yes.
But you
No,
don't
that
think
yeah. So go
like
ahead.
in other words, like if I had $100, that $100 belongs to me, right? And I think
All
it
right.
would be I think it would work if I said it's my property. I don't know. I mean, maybe you don't think that's the right word for it.
Yeah, especially because in Leviticus 25 it says that God owns all the property that God hits. Everything is God's basically. So even that dollar, the paper that it was printed on came from a tree that God created. So maybe in a secular sense, yes, I think you could insinuate that. But as Christians or Jews, I would say no.
So people can never be considered as property. Um, let's think about like Egyptian slavery. Um,
Yeah.
would you consider that chattel slavery?
Well, as far as the Torah is concerned, I don't know historically. Like, I don't know the scholarship on it, but the Torah seems to indicate that it was oppressive slavery, and I would say yes, it probably amounted to chattel slavery. Yeah.
Okay, but I know how you kind of view chattel slavery as involuntary, but not. I'm not talking about in virtue of involuntary servitude. Uh, I'm thinking about it in terms of, did the Pharaoh consider the Hebrews their property? In other words, in that sense.
Well, did he consider them like economic? Did he appraise? So I guess my question returned: do you think that the Pharaoh appraised the Hebrews in a financial sense or in a personal sense? Did he make like the Hebrews on like a level of furniture personally? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
Okay, so it is possible to own people as property. Just maybe you're saying the Hebrews did not view it that way. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, so like maybe we have to kind of you know break or elaborate on what we mean, or what do we mean by chattel? Do you mean like in the antebellum sense, or do you mean more like in a business transact like land? Like like the land is like something inanimate, but it's property though. I mean they or again, like I would also say again,
Well,
the property
like
belongs to God
I
anyway.
said,
But do you see what I'm
well,
saying?
I don't
Yeah.
understand property in the sense of maybe belonging, possession, ownership. That's kind of how I view that term.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't use okay if we're gonna use property like chattel.
Well, hang on. But you do believe a person can be considered property, right? Or because if you don't consider that
Yeah.
a human being can ever be considered as property, well, then that wouldn't be applied to the Hebrews, in
Right.
Egypt, and Rome, nowhere, right?
Well, yeah, I would say in the same sense, like, and I know Dr. Josh might disagree with me on this, but I would say in the same sense that LeBron James is the property of the Lakers, whatever team he plays for. But that doesn't mean his person, like his personal characteristics, are stripped away. But yes, he's the property of the Lakers, financially or economically.
So, in a sense of maybe like you know how the artists like in Motown or something, uh, you would say that those artists were the property of the record producers, something like that.
Yeah, or just like athletes or anything that involves some type of owner or boss
In
that's over
virtue of
people.
like a contractual agreement, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay, I mean,
the language
I
could
just find
easily.
that,
Yeah.
well, then, yeah, I mean, I don't know about translate. I don't know about the Hebrew word originally. I just know that, some of the English translations are like property or money or something like
Right.
that. And so I'm just looking at it in that sense. Um, maybe the biblical Hebrew word is understood differently, like kind of like how you're saying. I just don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Great question. Actually, that's actually a great question. I don't, in the way I understand it, that the Hebrews respected the person or the personhood of other people. They didn't strip that away. So if they were property, it would be in an economical sense, and that's how I would explain. But great question, by the way.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Grace.
No problem, man.
All right, you guys. I think with that, I think we can call it. And until next time, you guys good with that?
Yeah. Yep.
That's
Let's
it.
Take
call it.
care, Dr. Josh and
15
Tom.
and 0 now, Praise. You got me 15
Bam,
and 0.
You got
bam.
wasted, Dr. Josh. I took you to the cleaners, man.
So, yeah. All right. Y'all take
I
care.
appreciate you,
Have a
Dr.
good
Josh.
one, Dr.
Appreciate you.
Josh.
Praise. Appreciate you. Appreciate everybody.
See
All
you.
right, you
Take
guys.
care.
Thank you. You bet.
Take care.